Well, everybody, I met my guest today for the first time at last year's ASCFG conference, which is coming up in November this year, and hopefully we'll have a chance to chat about that just a little bit. But welcome, Shanti, to the Flower Podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we haven't had many guests down in your part of the country. And lately, I've really wanted to kind of address some of the challenges you guys face down there in Arizona. And I know that watching your feed, I felt for you this entire year because I feel like you've had at least three of the however many plagues there are. And so I just wanted to kind of reach out and kind of gain some perspective and wisdom and encourage you, and at the same time hear your story of how you got started growing flowers, because you also do a lot of vegetables. So tell us how your journey began.
Okay. Um, let's see. So I started out, I didn't grow up like gardening or farming at all in my family. But when I was a senior in high school, I went to this kind of alternative high school, and they let us just choose some career area that we were interested in and go find an internship in that. And then we got like 8 weeks to go like do that internship. And so my first one was at a greenhouse, and like I wanted to learn about farming. So I picked this greenhouse, and all I did for a few weeks was prune poinsettias. And I was really bored. I was like, this is not what I wanted to be at all. So I kind of like redirected, and I found this super hippy dippy organic farm where we like milked the goats. They had a raw organic dairy and like a pretty robust vegetable CSA. And I just like, I don't know why, because if someone approached me and wanted to do that now, I'd be like, no way, like a high school student. I went and lived at this farm in this little shack next to
Oh,
like
wow.
the duck pen, and they were super noisy. And I just got to do everything. I got to like drive the beat up trucks and milk the goats and start all the seedlings. And I just definitely sparked something in me that I didn't even know was there. And kind of from there on out, I just always kept coming back to farming, and I just knew it was what I wanted to do. So kind of fast forward, I went to college and didn't really love what I was studying, and then shifted gears and ended up studying agroecology, which is kind of a
Huh.
cross section of agriculture and like natural ecosystems or ecology. So how to basically sustainable agriculture with a big word. And that is what brought me to Arizona. So I came here to get my degree. And like as soon as I graduated, I started managing the local farmers market. And that's the farmers market that we still attend as our business, like 25 years later.
Wow.
And I went to work for my husband as to be an intern to help him on his farm, and never left. So I don't know. I was always kind of like, like a very indecisive person and world traveler. And then I like found farming, and I basically like set down some roots and like haven't moved since. So when my husband and he already had the farm going, but when I joined him, we were mostly growing vegetables. It was really tiny when we started, like a half an acre. And it just grew a little bit over time. So I've been here about 18 years, and he's been doing it like 24 or something like that. And we've just grown and grown, like, filled up our property, like moved on to the neighbor's property, bought another farm 5 miles down the road.
Oh, wow.
We started actually, before I came around, he was just selling door to door to our neighbors in this super small town that we live in. And then the farmers market opened, he started selling there. We've sold at multiple farmers markets, gone the CSA route, wholesale, like, we've kind of done the whole gamut, and we're still sort of perfecting our marketing and lifestyle. Like at some point down the line, you've like worked your butt off, and
Yeah.
seven days a week for like 10 years. And then you start to want to make choices like, well, how can we make this lifestyle a little more sustainable, And
Sure.
so now it's kind of perfecting that. Like, how do we have a day off? Or how do we, have some people manage some aspects of the business? So that's all happened. So about I don't even know how many years ago, maybe 10, 15. Like I don't have a good date in there. Somewhere in there, I started wanting to grow flowers. The first year I planted sunflowers, and my husband was like, wild sunflowers grow on the side of the road. I don't know who's going to buy those. But I planted a few rounds and sold them all, like no problem. And then it just like, kind of kept building from there. So it's like then zinnias and then gladiolas. And then like I did all the easy flowers and then started growing a little more harder to grow flowers. And then I started, going to like take courses, like originally did the floret course and just all, finding all the inspiration to sort of keep building the flower portion of the business. So I certainly still help manage like the whole farm entity, but my passion has definitely like shifted more towards flowers, which I find interesting because originally when I started like getting into farming, the passion was about like planting a seed and growing a thing that you could eat. Like it felt so fundamentally
Right.
like building your own sustenance. You know what I mean? It was like this
Yes.
full circle thing. Like you could grow the food, eat the food, then like feed your family. It felt like necessary and like I don't know, I can't think of the right word, like purposeful in that way. So it's almost funny that I got into flowers because flowers to me, not that I didn't like them, but it was kind of fluffy and kind of, like I wasn't really about like all the beauty of life. I was like the nitty gritty, like
Yeah.
hardcore part. And but for whatever reason, and I'm sure everyone comes to flowers for some different purpose or motivation, but it just stuck with me and I've really loved that process. Like I learned how to be a farmer first, and then getting into the flowers was like a whole new learning curve, a whole new realm. It just felt exciting and like it's like learning a whole new career or something. And so that's like kept me motivated and interested. Um and but I don't really see that going away. So then after like going to some courses, I joined the ASCFG and then I became a board member, and I don't know, it's just all keeps rolling and you keep building more onto it. But yeah, I'm pretty enmeshed.
So how many acres do you grow on now then?
So we have about, I'd say like 15 to 18 acres in production where we are like trying to do more big areas and cover crops. And so it's always shifting a little bit, but I'm just going to say 18 is a good round
Sure.
number.
And what roughly, I mean not exact, but roughly what do you think percentage wise is dedicated to flowers?
Flowers, I would say 4 acres, maybe 5. It's certainly a rough estimate because we're like within all of our fields, we're constantly
Right.
rotating crops. And so it's not very like clearly delineated. But yeah, I'd say probably about 4 acres of flowers.
Okay, so I mean, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot, and
Yep.
I think it's great. And the one thing I want to say is, I know in some circles that sometimes flowers get looked down on because it's more important to grow food than flowers, and people like kind of feel like they're a second class agricultural product. But I feel like you can feed your body, you can feed your mental health, you can, I mean, I feel like it's just as um, needy. I mean, we all need it just as much, I think. And so I'm kind of I'm glad you found your way there. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, me too. And I think, honestly, I think it's like doing what you like. Like there's not one thing that's more at this point in my journey, I feel like there's not one aspect that's more valuable than the other. Having grown, like having both arenas that we grow in and then getting to go market those products to the general public. So like garnering a lot of feedback, like people have similar feelings about both. Like the amount of people that are so, thankful and thrilled to come get like, really local, really unique food, like they're just as enthusiastic as like the flower customers. Like they, like
Yeah.
everyone, we do have people come and buy flowers from us and no vegetables. Like food is not their, or local food is not really their jam, and that's okay. So, but I think they're both super valuable. I'm happy that I get to like, be part of the whole realm. Like I feel so grateful we get to go eat at local restaurants that buy consistently from us. And we're like celebrities when we go in and they like give us all the free dishes and, and people are like, oh, it's Whipstone, I mean, that feels as great as like that,
Sure.
like getting to walk into some of the flower shops we sell to. And then the employees who I don't generally get to interact with are like so happy to meet us. It feels really special to grow a quality product and then get that feedback from people about, how it impacts their life or like how they appreciate it. It's super wonderful. And I think a lot of people in their jobs, like maybe don't have that immediate feedback, right? They don't get to see like this engine that I built went to like fix somebody's truck, or I don't know. That's like a silly example, but just to get to have that interaction with like the end user it's really fulfilling.
Yeah. I can totally see that. And I just, that's so awesome. I think, and you wonder too, does some of that because it's a smaller community, it's just more closed knit, or do you feel like that is just the kind of relationships that you've cultivated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's about the relationships. I think you could have we do live in a smaller town, but we sell our products like to Phoenix, which is a giant
Oh, wow.
city, I think,
Yeah.
uh, relative, it's a big city. And so even we're not going to know people everywhere we go, but if we go into a place that is a customer of ours, because it's further away and we have like delivery, you know, like people who do deliveries for us, or a part of a co-op network where like we sell the stuff to them and then it gets delivered, they're still really thrilled to get to meet us, because I think we live in this world that's very like, the relationships are hard to come by now, right? Or the stuff's coming from so far away, you don't know who grew it or who
Right.
picked it or like what farm it came from. So I think it has more to do with like the direct relationship than the size of the town we're in.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I just think it's really important for people to hear that, because sometimes, they may be shy or introverted, and it is more challenging. But once you can break out of that mold or break into another business, and you've got that relationship started, it is the most valuable asset I think sometimes you can have, is those relationships, because they're what help you weather all the other craziness that goes on. Okay, so I want to talk about the craziness, but I also you've mentioned several times already like ways you're selling your product, and I just for people that maybe aren't familiar with your business, what are the main ways you sell your flowers?
Mhm. Yeah, so I would say we have kind of like three main arenas, and they're maybe equal-ish to each other, right? So we currently sell at one farmers market that's in Prescott, so that's kind of the nearest town to us. We used to sell at multiple markets, but as our business matured, we kind of, cut things out to start other things. So farmers market, and then CSA, which I don't know if you've talked about CSA as much on this podcast, but it's basically like a co-op where people buy in at the beginning of the season and then get a delivery every week. So we do vegetable boxes, and you can get a flower bouquet with your CSA, like whatever you sign up for. We sell to a couple of other CSAs within our state that like procure from multiple farms. And
Mm.
then we sell wholesale. So with the vegetables, it's like to restaurants and some natural food stores. With flowers, it's to florists and designers. For a while, we were selling to a bigger wholesaler, and that relationship has kind of ebbed and flowed, kind of based on the management. And I don't want to step on any toes or anything, but it's all about relationships pretty much. So those are the three main things: farmers market, CSA, and wholesale.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I know that's a tough topic there, to dealing with wholesalers, and me being a buyer for a wholesaler, I feel very fortunate that I get to work with local farmers, and I know that not everywhere is like that, and they don't have the same attitude about it, which really frustrates me, because I feel like you sometimes end up shooting yourselves in the foot by not embracing it more. So I'm glad to hear that you had a period of time, and I hope that that opens up for you again.
Yeah,
So,
I think it will. I think it's, Yeah, it's just something to keep in mind that just because like, you get in and then like, things are working for a while, but it gets rocky. It doesn't mean it's out for good. It's just the nature of things. Like you have to like, be in the right place at the right time with the right other person to like make it flow. And sometimes I think that there's people in the, wholesale industry here that value it, but maybe they're getting some pressure from higher up on, profit margins, or you know what I mean? There's just something that like they're not getting the full support they need to like make it fit, or maybe we didn't have the like volume and diversity that we needed to actually make it like a super well sticking relationship. And that's okay. Like we're going to evolve and they're going to evolve, and we'll figure it out down the road. So I
Yeah.
feel positive, and it's actually really inspiring to me. I'll get into a little more of like what's happening in Arizona in the local flower scene. But I tend to go to a lot of other parts of the country to educate myself. And so like whenever I go up to the Pacific Northwest, because they have a pretty good conference every year, I always talk to one of the buyers up there who like initially connected me with somebody in the Phoenix area. And like, I just realized it's a different kind of culture and mentality up there, and they have really embraced it. They have specific buyers to only deal with the local farmers because it's more work. It's more a lot of things. And so it's just like, I guess it sort of ties into like what it's like to do what we're doing in our region. Is like I do feel like we're behind the times, like maybe 5-10 years behind like when local flowers were sort of really like building momentum in other parts of the country. It wasn't really a thing here yet. I mean, of course people bought them at the farmers market, but there wasn't the same sort of demand or brides asking for them, or like flower shops wanting them because their customers wanted them. It takes time. So I kind of know we're like things will come, and I got the long game in mind, and I have patience for like the general public to sort of come around to what is already happening in other places. It works for us.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm surprised in a way because I would have thought Arizona um, might, and maybe it's a stereotype I assume, but I would have thought they would have been a little more current with some of that. I'm excited to hear that they're embracing it and that it's really doing well. I have to confess, when I think of Arizona, I don't think of cut flower farms. I mean, I really don't, and I can't think of when I think of a lot of parts of the country, that's got to be on the top states for challenges to grow. And I'm kind of curious, what is it like growing there? I mean, I realize for you, it's kind of like you deal with it every day, but for a lot of people, they don't realize. Or there's other farmers that grow in Texas and different places that deal with the same thing. And I'm just kind of just wanted to chat briefly about kind of what you've been dealing with this year, how you're managing that, and things you do to kind of increase your season dealing with extreme temperatures, possibly, which I don't think you have as bad as some other areas do. But yeah, do you mind chatting about that?
Sure. So I would say in general, when I go other places, people are very baffled by Arizona. Like, how can you grow anything there? Like, it's the desert.
Yeah.
So we certainly are not a hub of flower growers. There is a little bit of a historical, there was like a pretty, I don't know if robust is the right word. There was like a flower growing era. I think it was like sort of the 40s, 50s, 60s down in the Phoenix area, because it basically has been taken over by development. But there was a lot of Japanese farmers that grew it. If you think of, it's a little bit like Florida, maybe, like they had this kind of winter season where they would grow stock and sweet peas and a lot of those cool season flowers like outside. And it was like very thriving until Phoenix had a lot of growth and there was a lot of people moving there, especially snowbirds. And so then it basically just got taken over by development. So that's like long gone. But the people who lived in Arizona for a long time, they always bring that up. So there's kind of this kind of nostalgia for this like era when there was like a real flower growing industry. So the other thing that's a bit different about Arizona is it's a very diverse geographically. So where I live near Prescott is in the mountains. So we're like a 5,000 feet elevation, more or less. And we have almost the opposite season of the low desert, with like Phoenix, Tucson, is we have like snow in the winter, and kind of spring, summer, fall is our main growing season. So it's still very hot here, and we deal with a lot with the heat and the intense sun, but it's just, so there's just a lot of diversity. So depending on where you're at in the state, it could be extremely different, your growing season. It's also kind of cool that we have that, as there starts to be more small flower growers, which they've really cropped up in the last couple of years, and we're kind of coalescing a sort of collective, we're beginning the work to like form some collectives, is that we have a really vast growing season with things coming from different regions of the state. So so where we are, weirdly, like our last frost date is June 1st, and that's
What?
almost a month later than I think a lot of other parts of the country.
Okay, I wasn't
so
expecting that.
We get really warm, sunny days, but because we're in the desert and the high elevation desert, there's extreme temperature swings from day to night. So because the air is dry, so if you think about it, moisture is what actually like buffers temperature swings. So like if you wanted to keep your greenhouse a little warmer, you might like put some water barrels in there, because the water sinks the heat and then kind of like makes it not get so cold at night. So similarly, like if you just think of the humidity in the air, like the drier the air, the more temperature swing you have. So that's kind of what we struggle with. And I definitely talk to other people that are like in the arid West, like Colorado, New Mexico, like the mountains of California, that are very similar. And it's again, people can't really believe when our last frost date is, but so this year, one of the plagues, I think it's not a real biblical plague, but we had a frost on June 25th. So almost a
Oh my
month
gosh.
after our last frost date, when everything was planted out, we had a pretty intense frost. So that was like one problem. Then we had a mega hailstorm in May, and now we're dealing with some like really big grasshopper plagues. And I'm almost to the point where I feel like I can't even, if something else goes wrong, I'm not gonna be able to say anything, because it just sounds like I'm not making it up, but you know what I mean? Like if you continually like whine about what's going on, you just get people down and they don't even believe you anymore, So it's been a pretty intense year. But that being said, my experience in like 20 years of farming is that there's almost always something going wrong. It's not easy. Even if you really nail things like the timing on the planting, and like getting all of your like plugs ordered at the right time, and you like get them in the ground at the right time, and you cover everything, and you get the irrigation down, like even when you're doing like your utmost best, there is just a lot of things that can come along and wipe it out. And so I want to say it's harder to farm here. It feels that way sometimes for me, but I honestly think everyone is, like has their own challenges, and they feel very, like very intense and very forefront, right, to their own operations. So obviously we make things grow, right? We produce product, but there's just a lot working against us. And I have to say, like, it's always been that way, but I gotta say that climate change feels more intense. I think it's more intense because of climate change. I think farmers whining about the weather and like crop failures are age old, but yeah, it's feeling like the pressure is intensifying. That's how I feel.
Mm. Well, it's definitely been a lot, because you even, like, maybe this was part of the hailstorm, but you had like a lot of rain, a lot of water.
Yeah, that came with the hail. Yeah.
Yeah, that was amazing, the amount of water you had kind of just tear through everything.
Yeah.
Um, but I will say this, when you are having, like with the grasshoppers, you're having an unusual year for that. And I know that even sometimes that can be cyclical. What are you doing to mitigate that? How are you handling that? Because I know don't you try to pretty much do everything naturally as best you
Yeah.
can?
Yeah. So we're not certified organic, but we're basically growing with organic practices. I was actually in my former life, I was an organic inspector, so I know a lot about the rules, and I just don't feel like it's we don't really have the demand for to be certified organic. But and it's a little difficult with flowers if you're using like solutions in your water or buying in plugs. So, but basically everything that we're doing on our farm, we're not using anything that would not be allowed in organic production. And it's really hard with the grasshoppers. There are a lot of insect pests that there are things we can spray that are organic approved, but with the grasshoppers, it's super hard. So there's one thing that you can use. It's called Nolo bait or CMS4. It's like a brand with a kind of a disease, and you spread it and the grasshoppers eat it, and then they kind of spread it throughout the population. It doesn't work that great, but from what I understand, the factory that produces this burnt down, and so it's been unavailable for the last 2 years. But even with that, the grasshoppers are very hard to control. So if you have some and they're doing some damage, it feels like you can deal with it, right? They eat what they like best first. So maybe you'd have, a crop failure here or there, but they've just been so intense this year that they're like going from one crop to the next to the next. So I hope that they're starting to slow down, but I'm not 100% sure yet. So unfortunately, there's just not a lot that we can do to mitigate them, and that's super frustrating. So with other pests, like I said, there's like some things you can do, and it takes work, right? Like spraying frequently or whatever. But so it's a challenging one. There are certain things that they're leaving alone over others. So we're still harvesting stuff, but it's been a stretch to like meet all of our demands. One of the hard things about a CSA is like you're getting upfront support from your customers, but they're expecting to get stuff every week, and so they're understanding, like especially in the vegetable department, like if there's some lighter weeks and then some heavier weeks, but you have to deliver something. And so it just adds a level of stress to farming's already a little bit stressful, but yeah, like when you're working really hard but things are kind of getting taken out like underneath you. So we're surviving, but it's been a little rough. And I do think the grasshoppers are cyclical. Like we don't generally have them extremely bad from one year to the next. They kind of go in cycles. So we might have them very minimally one year and then really bad the next, and then a few years before they're bad again. I don't know enough to know what drives that cycle, but
Yeah. I don't either. I used to, but I don't remember it now. I know that it's just a real challenge. How much, I mean, like, it is amazing. If you have a little grasshopper here and there, I know it's not like no one really stresses about that. But when you have thousands, I mean, it's amazing how much damage they can do in a very short period of time. Like you said, especially if it's something that's sort of their favorite. Yeah. How much product do you think you've lost this year just because of it, percentage wise? Like 10%, 5%?
That's a great question.
I mean, just approximately.
I hope if we calculated it like over the whole year, maybe 10%. Right now it feels like 50%,
Yeah,
but
right.
that's at least like in the last month or something. So yeah, maybe maybe 25%, which is pretty significant,
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is.
Yeah.
And it's great that your customers that did the CSAs, are understanding about it. And you're right. There's ways you can kind of compensate and help over the period of time, even it all out. So I really love that. One thing I thought about when I saw some of those videos a month or so ago is their soil, because a lot of times when you see people farming, they have all this amazing black rich compost soil, but because of where you're located, things are very different. And I know that we were talking earlier that that's kind of something you're really working on or you're looking at, and I'd like to kind of hear more about what you're doing, because you have such a different again, you have a very different set of circumstances when it comes to soil.
Yeah, I think I think soils are like, there is a well of knowledge to learn about soils. And so I personally, like, it's a topic I'm super interested in, is like soil health and like building soils that will help you be sustainable in the long run.
Sure.
But also I'll always feel like I'm at like the tip of the iceberg of like what I know. It's like I know a little bit and I dig a little more, and then there's so much more to learn and understand. So I think before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about how we started participating in this soil health study. So for us, it started with a cooperative extension agent who was like the small farm specialist in our area, and he was coming out to the farm, and we were talking about some of our challenges. And so we started, and they were actually like kind of like plant disease issues that we were having in some of our greenhouses. So we started like investigating that, sending them off to the lab, doing some soil tests, and then doing some like little micro experiments, like different cover crop combinations, and seeing how that would, affect the soil a year down the line or something. And so then that turned into this extension professional writing a grant, and then it turned into like a bigger project. So right now we're part of this 3-year grant study through the University of Arizona, working on soil health. And so for us, we got to sort of dictate our parameters of like what we wanted our different like trial plots and applications to be, and what our goal was. So it's just an interesting way to delve deeper into something that we're kind of already doing and already want to know more about, but getting some kind of professional like science, smarty pants to help us like understand on a deeper level. My experience has been like over the years, we always took soil tests, but some of them are very basic and they're not actually telling you the depth of information that you want or maybe don't realize you need to know. So we were kind of, I don't want to say led astray, but like I just feel like I really wasn't getting the information I needed early on in our farming journey. So kind of as you mentioned, the soils here are maybe a little more challenging to work with. So in the Southwest, it's very arid. There's not a lot of like natural plant growth, so you don't get a lot of organic matter like in the soil maybe before you start farming. So our goal was always add as much organic matter as possible. So we got a lot of like what's available around here is like horse or steer manure. We would get that and we would put a lot of that on our field. So not only did that bring in a lot of weed seeds, but like 10, 15 years into the farming journey, we realized we're like actually in super excess of potassium and phosphorus. So not to get too like dorky on the soils here, but the 3 main like macronutrients you need that you'll find in anything that's called a fertilizer is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And so any like compost or manure-based fertilizer is going to have some of all those 3 things. So we kind of realized we were in a pickle of like, we couldn't keep doing the same fertilization practices that we were used to if we wanted to not add any more potassium or phosphorus, which were in like really high levels, but we needed a source for nitrogen. So about like 2 years ago, we just really switched gears and stopped applying manure, and we got some nitrogen-based fertilizer. So like currently we're using feather meal and blood meal because they both are high in nitrogen, don't have any of the other 2. And then we're doing a lot of cover cropping to increase the soil organic matter. So sorry, I'm going on a big tangent here, but it's something
No, it's great.
I love learning more about and I'm really passionate about. And it's going to be super different for everybody, right? So just because what we're doing doesn't mean it's what anyone else in particular is going to need. So I think it's really important to like not a soil test, but like have somebody knowledgeable help you interpret it. And I feel like that's what I was lacking for so long until I got someone who really took an interest in what we were doing and would like dig into it with me on a deeper level rather than just getting your results from a lab. And it's like, you need so many pounds of nitrogen per acre, which as an organic farmer is a little bit hard to like interpret. Like pounds of nitrogen is different than when you're like adding compost. And so I really loved being at Ellen Polishuk's talks at last year's ASCFG conference. She kind of like blew my mind. And so after we've been part of this whole soil health study, I went to her and got some like kind of private consultation on like soil analysis. And she also just taught me so much. And it was really interesting because she was looking at our soil tests. She's in the Mid-Atlantic region and she's looking at our soil testing. She's like, I've never seen anything like this. And this is like her job is like helping people look at their soil tests. So we're just really different here than a lot of other parts of the country. So that's totally fine. Plants still want to grow. You can grow amazing crops here. It's just, you got to know, what you're dealing with and make sure you're not like exacerbating your problems, but like actually getting to a more balanced place. So almost everything, every soil needs some tinkering, right? Some help. Inevitably, if you're going to grow things, harvest them and send them away, like sell them. You can't do that forever without replenishing the soil with something. But just because someone grows amazing crops in Oregon and you're like, oh, well, my dahlias don't grow that good and I want them to look like those dahlias, like what kind of fertilizer do you use? That sort of is like a big pet peeve of mine. Like, just because someone's using a fertilizer, that's not what is like making the crop healthy and productive. It's all like dependent on what you're starting with and what you need. And so, there's just like, to me, it's like a lifetime of like knowledge to be gained in like what you're dealing with. And I find it super fascinating and it helps me not get bored. Like it's, there's always more to learn and like deeper levels to like, to take it to, to be a better farmer and to like have a healthier ecosystem and to leave the soil better than you found it. So.
Oh yeah, I love that last statement especially. I feel like too, people don't realize just how fluid that situation can be. It's just like something worked for a couple years, but just because it's worked for a couple years, oh wow, all of a sudden you realized, okay, my potassium and my phosphorus were out of whack. I mean, maybe they were elevated, but then, or maybe they were fine, but then how do you add more nitrogen and not add more of those other two things or make that situation worse? And I think that's, I mean, it's crazy things. Like I know I was talking with a grower here a few weeks ago, and she got her soil test. She was getting her soil test done, and she was talking to some other. She's a flower farmer. She was talking to some other just more traditional farmers in the area, and they were like, oh, you need to apply lime, lime, you got to adjust the pH, you always, everyone here has to do that. Well, she got her soil test back and it's kind of like, no, she was really fine, she really didn't need that. She did need some other stuff, but that was not one of them. And it makes you just think how many people go through these motions, waste money and resources and time on something that might not actually be as helpful as you think it is. So, and
it might actually be
yeah.
harmful, right? If you're already at a good level and then you add something you didn't really need, it could cause, detrimental effects that's like hard to dig out of sometimes. So I think, while there's amazing kind of folk knowledge or like, what the old timers did, it can actually be true and accurate. There's also like, you want to be wary of like, kind of using the best resources at your disposal to like do the best job you can. So sometimes like getting the information first before you like go in whole hog and like change a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, true. Well, I know we were also talking before the episode we started recording, and I we were talking, you mentioned profitability and the whole idea behind, this is always a popular topic. This is always one that I don't feel like we can ever talk too much about because every situation is different and that. And so with you guys have been doing this a long time. You guys have been you have a combination of vegetables and flowers. I'm sure they have to have different costs. They have different labor probably for some things. Not everything's the same. So I'd love to kind of dig into this topic a little bit and how you approach it, and just because I know there's a ton of farmers out there, and heck, there's a ton of florists out there that probably need to hear, because they need to understand what goes into the cost of some of these flowers too, because sometimes people are so quick to say, well, that seems expensive. I'm like, well, it's really not expensive when you look at all of the costs associated with it. So did I overwhelm you with that hydrant question? So
no, I'll just take a piece and see where it goes. But
there.
So I would say the one thing this year's been like, some extra challenges for us, probably, reduced income, but like labor's the same, and so those things start to really like eat at you. And like, me and my husband are looking at the books, like getting nervous. The one thing I feel like I have going for me is like, we've been in business for like 20 plus years and we're doing okay, right? So if we have a bad year, like it's a pinch, it's hard, but like, we have enough of a cushion and we've been doing it long enough to know, like, okay, even prior to like being better at looking at the profitability, we are making it. So that's like, this is both of our full-time job
Right.
that we've been doing for many, many years, supporting our kids, supporting like, 12 to 15 employees. So it's, when things aren't going well, it feels really stressful because, we have employees that are like family to us. We wouldn't, we want to make sure everyone is secure and like, can keep going, and it like, and that there's no no issue of like laying people off or anything like that. So we do tend to like take on a lot of the stress ourselves. But the fact that we've been doing it this long and we're still in business and we're profitable is like, okay, we must be doing something right. So that's a little bit of like a balm when things are going wrong. And we have to remind ourselves, like, this can be a bad year and that'll be okay, and we'll keep going. However, all that being said, we were talking about profitability. So we're part of this soil grant study, and I'm part of another grant study on profitability. That's a SARE grant. And that's super interesting. It's not exactly gonna tell you how to be profitable, but the goal being that you can break down individual crops or enterprises and determine. So it's called Know Your Cost to Grow, or that's the tool that we're using to determine it. So it's really easy to kind of ask yourself, how much does it cost me to grow Lysianthus or whatever?
Right.
But the reality is it's so hard when you're growing, like for us, over 100 different crops, to piece out, like, what does it cost to grow this one crop? And what it comes down to is, of course, there's different input costs, right? Like, are you buying plugs or starting seeds? Or like, what's the time frame to grow a crop? Is it in the greenhouse or in the field? Like, what kind of fertilizer do you need, or drip tape or netting or not? Like, there's a lot of questions that are kind of easy and or maybe hard to determine. But what I've learned from being part of this study is like, actually the clincher is labor. Like, labor is the thing that's going to make a crop be profitable or not profitable, but depending on how efficient you are at growing it. And that's just like the thing that tends to eat up more of the cost than almost anything else. Like, the fertilizer becomes negligent. Maybe the dahlia tubers are a little more expensive, or ranunculus corms, those things that have a little higher, contribution to the margins. But labor is really like the kind of the thing that will break you. I guess it's different if you are pretty small, you're doing it all yourself and you're not accounting for your own labor. But in the end, that's also going to bite you, right? Like, if you're not making money to pay yourself,
Right.
then is this just volunteering? Like, you have to like factor that in. So basically, we're using this tool, and there's like 12 or 15 different farms involved in this study. We pick certain crops, and then we really break down like every single thing we do for that crop. And then we can, and then what is it, like, how much are you selling it for? What is your yield? What, like, how much time do you take in post-harvest handling to bunch and sleeve that, those Lysianthus? Like, there's so many little pieces that it's hard to put that, for me, it's too hard to put it all together in my brain. But when using a tool that forces us to like tease out numbers of like, okay, so a 50-pound bag of fertilizer cost me this much. Let me actually determine how many pounds am I spreading on one bed, and how long does it take me to run over that with the tractor and the fertilizer spreader? That's pretty low, but how long does it take to weed that bed and then harvest that? And, so it's like taking all the pieces and coming up with a number. And so one of the things that profitability study, like, really what you're going to learn is like, are you making money on that crop? Are you losing money? And then you can start to tweak things in the tool. Like, okay, so say I bought a new piece of equipment that would make this piece go a lot faster. Okay, you're going to need to factor in like, how long is it going to take me to pay off that piece of equipment? But you could start to analyze like how much less labor you'd then be putting into that, and it could be like kind of tip the needle into profitability versus not. So I mean, I feel like I won't know how helpful this all is till like we're done with the year-long study, but it's so like, I find it so fascinating. And like, it's just like the stuff that gets me excited is to like start to dig into all that and then to have a method for figuring it out.
Sure. Has there been anything so far? I don't know how long you've been doing it, but anything that you're kind of like, I never really thought about that.
Um, yes. So like some of the things are like you're tracking like your total harvest and you're tracking like your market, like what, like your sales. So while something could be like, say in an ideal situation, say you sold every stem, maybe it's profitable. But if you know that you're like shrinking a bunch or like things go unsold, but you already put the labor in to weeding it, harvesting it, bringing it
Right.
into the cooler, but it doesn't get sold. And so then you actually start like looking at the number of just the sold stems, like then you really start to like it's question, should I really be growing that much of this crop? Or, like I like to grow, we're not really space limited. We kind of like um we have the room to kind of grow almost as much as we want of anything. I mean, it all is a labor and space and money decision, but like we can choose to like take some space out of production for cover cropping or grow more of this or less of that or trial new things.
Sure.
But how much like labor are you putting into something that like might not sell? So that to me was kind of like, I mean, I guess I already knew that on some level. Of course you don't want anything to go unsold, but how that can really like
Add
you
up.
might look at something as profitable until you like can't account for all those stems you didn't sell. Then your profit has to come from only the ones you sold. That was like a real eye opener to me.
Yeah. And it's interesting because even I know during during the slower months, a lot of times you start scratching your head and you start looking at these things. And I know the gentleman I work for, he asked me today, he says, well, do you want to look at these numbers? I'm like, no, not really. I really don't want to look at these numbers because I mean, I was joking. I mean, I did,
Yeah,
but it was just kind of like, no, I don't, ignorance is bliss, but
totally.
ignorance is bliss until you can't pay your bills. And that's when it starts to really impact you. And yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. I will say another thing that we did that I found super like insightful and interesting. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We brought on a farm business consultant. So the company is called Kitchen Table Consultants, and they just work with farms and small food businesses, and really use a lot of just pretty mainstream like economic tools and like accounting tools to like really analyze your business and then start to look at like if you make changes to your business, like how that will affect again your profitability. So it was really helpful to have somebody, because I'm like kind of like, yes, ignorance is bliss, but it's not really going to like serve you in the end. So you have to get
right.
over the fact that I just like to grow this and start to really like make important decisions. And so they just really helped us like reorganize all of our accounting to be more useful to like what we wanted to be able to see in our business. And then like, so we worked with one person in particular. She was amazing. And we worked with them over about a year. It was a lot of work on our end to like actually go through and like make budgets and like tease apart numbers and do a lot of like things that are not in my wheelhouse.
Sure.
um but she was like, look at it this way. It's totally fine if you lose money on something, but you want to know that you're doing it. Like you want to make that choice. So like we raise sheep and chickens. Um, we the sheep we raise just for our family for food. Chickens, we sell the eggs. We always knew that it was like a big money sink, but like we didn't really want to look at how much, you know what I mean? And people be like, well, just raise your price of eggs. And I'm like, I don't know if there's any price that we could raise the eggs to where we would make a profit. But it just really helped. It's like, yes, ignorance is bliss, but like eventually you got to pull off the blinders and like make some hard choices. So we still have our sheep because we love having like home raised meat, but we can like continue to sell off some animals and have a smaller flock, knowing it's never going to be a business proposition for us. And so it's the same thing with any flowers you might be growing. Like you can grow anything you want that's just like because it makes you happy, but you should probably grow less of it, right? If you're losing money on it, the Like you don't want to grow more of it, unless you're going to be able to make a change, like change your production model so that it can become profitable. Otherwise, you got to know it's a money loss and you do it for fun, right? And so it's really making those like tough business decisions.
Well, I love that because I feel like sometimes you're right. I mean, it's okay if that's what you want to do, but at least maybe how much the chickens are costing you, and you make the choice whether, okay, that's okay for my family because I want this and I can recoup some of the cost, some of the overhead through selling eggs or whatever. But I wanted to go back to one thing too because I see this with florists all the time, where they don't charge correctly for their own time. And when you made the comment about farmers who don't really pay themselves, I feel and the disservice they're doing, I feel like you've got to make a point, at somewhere in this conversation that if you're hoping to grow, if you're trying to get your business to a profitable state, and you have to get to a certain volume to do that, and you physically can't do it all yourself, you're going to have to pay somebody at some point. And if you don't start accounting for those hours on when it's just you, your customers are going to be in for a big shock when you start realizing, oh wow, I'm paying somebody X amount of dollars. Even if it's only seasonal, it doesn't matter. You're still paying somebody, and you may have to pay for taxes, you may have to pay for workman's comp, you may have to pay for I don't know what, but those are all additional expenses that go to the cost of goods. And if you don't if you don't start that, you end up, I don't know. I just feel like you shoot yourself in the foot at some point. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you're shaking your head. Yeah. So I don't know. I just want to, I just want people to not sell themselves short.
Yeah, totally. And I get that, there's a lot of new growers out there, right? So there's people they're in like the front end of their learning curve. So it's really hard to account for your time like appropriately when you're just like learning this thing. And maybe it's a part-time
Sure.
business. Maybe it's just like a dream, like, a future dream and you're working towards it like on a small scale. Like of course there's going to be um just like for my husband and myself when we started, we were just like putting our all into it and really not making anything. We were just like doing whatever it took to like make this thing happen, right? So there's that
Right.
piece that is okay and appropriate, right? Maybe you worked and saved money so you could like start this business. But I agree with you. If you have any sense of being in it for the long run, whether it's just you or you're going to grow to have employees, yeah, you have to start accounting for it. Maybe you don't know how to account for it in the beginning, but like you have to have that in mind. And it is like having employees is so expensive. Not only like everything like you mentioned, like workers comp, insurance, taxes, like there's there's a lot involved, but sometimes it's like they're out there like, you get them on task, you're all like set and you leave them to do something, you go do something else and you come back and they've like ripped everything out that they were supposed to be weeding around, or there's like constantly things that they're like
Oh, right.
breaking or messing up, and like that is just like par for the course, right? Of course it means like always learning to be better, like a better manager. um that's another story. That's hard. Like for me that's been like a hard uh thing to accept, is that I'm more of a manager than a like have my hands on the dirt more. I still do a lot of field work, but basically like if you're not kind of operating at a bigger level to keep all of your employees like efficient and functioning well and having the tools they need and like knowing what the protocol is, then you're like yeah, then you're wasting money because they're not being efficient. But yeah, so I think
Good
there's a
point.
curve from going from like you don't know anything to you're like in this like learning phase, but eventually you have to account, like you have to pay yourself or charge enough for your product that you're like supporting yourself, like you could replace yourself if you couldn't do the work. I think exactly what you said. And sometimes the particulars of that, like figuring out exactly what that is, it takes some time to come to, right? But you should be thinking in those terms.
Sure. I've got to ask you this question. What has the ASCFG meant for you?
um I love the ASCFG. I mean, I don't want to be too like on a soapbox or anything, but I think, um, you know, I think every flower grower should join that organization. I just know for me, so being in an area where not a lot of people were doing what I was doing, I was like shooting in the dark for so long, like just trying things. You know, we were pretty accomplished farmers already, or pretty
Right.
seasoned farmers, so it wasn't like we didn't know how to plant crops and manage them, but like stage of harvest and like post harvest solutions, and just there's so many things that I kind of didn't really have in my tool belt or didn't know about. And so joining the ASCFG was like a revelation. Like there's all this information out there, and there's all these really adept growers that are really willing to share their knowledge. So just as soon as I went to my first conference and got to go on a farm tour, I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been needing. I didn't realize that this resource was out there. I think for several years I knew about the ASCFG, but it seemed a little expensive, so I didn't join. And then I was like, oh, what was I thinking? Like $200 a year is nothing compared to like what you get out of it. So
Right.
I love the organization. Obviously, I've like been on the board. So I'm in my last year. Like this will be my 6th year on the board, and I'm about to step down because my term is up, and there'll be a new person elected for my region. And I just wish that there was like the vegetable growers counterpart for the ASCFG. There is a lot of regional groups, but I feel like I'm not part of an organization that teaches me about growing vegetable crops in the same, like with the same quality and standard, and like very like breadth of what they offer as the ASCFG. So I'm just very grateful for the organization and the people who really run it, like in the office. It's such a wealth of knowledge. So that's what it means to me. It just has taught me so much. Not only that, but it's actually like introduced me to like some of my best friends now who are flower growers who we talk daily or almost daily, like just like kind of meeting your people, so to speak, like the people who are as dorky about the things that I'm into, the things that you're into. Like you'll find though that group of friends that basically you get to like bounce all your ideas off of, vent to about all your problems, like so I don't know, it's given me like, yeah, I can't really put it into words how much I feel like I've gotten out of it. And maybe you won't get as much as I've gotten, like I'm maybe like extreme, but you're definitely going to get something that's going to make it worthwhile for you. So yeah, this can be my little plug for, I think it's a great organization if you're growing flowers, or I mean there's people on the other end of things, like wholesalers or people selling products or buyers or florists that are also part of the organization. But in general, it's a lot of growers. And so it's a great organization to join. The resources are really vast, and you should definitely come to a conference because that's where you'll meet your future
Best
best
friends.
friends in the flower growing world. Yeah.
Yeah, I was amazed because I had not been to one in, I mean, ever really. I think I went to a regional one back 20 something years ago in the Southeast. And of course, after COVID, everyone getting together, I think everyone was just really excited to see everybody last year. Because it had been a while. Because I don't think there had been a conference for a couple of years. Oh, I don't even know. Was there?
Yeah, I think we had 2 years with no conference because of
Right.
COVID. I think that's true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had one
And
planned and then it was
right.
canceled, and yeah.
Right. And so, but you really did. And it's what's interesting is I had the opportunity to talk to some people and to witness, some of these people that these these growers have been friends for over a decade. I mean, for 10, 20 years, some of these farmers have been friends, and they met through this organization. And I hate to say they're the old timers because I hate to say that, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, but that's how long the friendships are. I mean, it's just it's really impressive. To me, it says a lot for the group of people that are on the board, the group of people that put together the publications, that Judy, Linda, all of them that do everything they do. I'm sure I mean there's a bunch of new people there too. and doing educational stuff. And I mean, it's just there's a lot going on, and I'm really looking forward to this year's conference. I feel like it's gonna be pretty spectacular, and I can't wait to see a bunch of my new flower friends I made last year. So
Yeah,
yeah,
well, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah.
yeah,
So I mean, just to like give a little plug, this year's conference is in St. Louis. I might get the state wrong, November 6th, 7th, and 8th, the 6th, 7th, somewhere in that
yeah. I think
realm.
it's 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Um,
Yeah,
okay. And a tour of Urban Buds, Mima Davis, who's been on the board for a very long time and been like really involved with the ASCFG as an amazing grower and has a very like urban farm in the heart of St. Louis. So Julio from the Flower Hats can be doing like some kind of flower installation demo, and there's a lot of great speakers, amazing farm tour, a lot of cool stuff happening. So if anyone is interested, check it out. You can still sign
yep.
up.
That's right. It's ascfg.org is the place to go. So always like to end with that advice question, and when I have someone seasoned like yourself that's been doing this for a while, I you've already given a ton of great advice. So I hate to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So I'm wondering if you have something you'd like to leave our listeners that maybe has meant a lot to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things, like one of my takeaways that helps me sort of persevere and keep going, even though it's like this is not an easy career choice. It's very rewarding and there's a lot of beauty, but it's like a real challenge. And for this year, I'm feeling like what a downer it can be, like when you put your heart and soul and money and time and employees' time into it, like, and a lot of it gets like taken, like swept out from under you, like it could be really soul crushing. And so I think I think I just like read somebody's post on Instagram the other day, and they were just talking about like, especially in the like age of social media and seeing everyone and all like everything wonderful that they have to show, which of course we have to do to promote our businesses, is just like the reminder that like for every like gorgeous like armlet of flowers, there's like, the super weedy, like, unmanaged area, like the thing you couldn't, that got away from you, or like the thing that's totally like bug riddled, or like the thing you intended to have happen that never transpired. Just that like we all have a lot of failures, and hopefully eventually those lead to some successes, but just that like to give yourself sort of some grace for those failures. Also, I always say, like, for me to even like evaluate if a crop is worth growing, I have to try it like 3 times. So there's like, the first time where I don't know what I'm doing at all, and I like plant it at the wrong
Right.
time of year, forget to pinch it, don't, like let this bug get on it or whatever. And then there's like the second year where I have a little more knowledge, but I don't quite nail it, and hopefully the third time where it does really good and I feel like I know what I'm doing. It doesn't mean it'll be good every year, but at least I kind of have the blueprint figured out of what it takes to grow a good version of this crop. But sometimes like you try it 3 times and it's bad every time, and I'll go, okay, taking it off the table, So just that like in this business, there's going to be a lot of failures. So that's okay. Like plan for it, like financially factor that in, and that like it doesn't make you a bad person or a bad grower because some things don't do well. Could be your climate, could be like it doesn't fit in your production model, like you don't have enough labor to weed that crop as many times as it needs to be weeded or whatever. So I don't know, just like that like self talk, what like good self talk, like you're a good person whether all your crops succeed or not, and to go easy on yourself. That's what my advice.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I appreciate you saying that so much. I'm curious, one thing you just saying that made me think about, do you guys plan like a certain percent? Like, if you know you're going to need, um, uh, and I'm being crazy, like if you're going to need 1,000 bunches of sunflowers over a period of time, do you plan, like what percentage of that do you plan to fail? Maybe so that way you plant extra to make sure you have what you need. Because that could be true for food or for whatever it is. Like
Yeah,
some people feel like, well, I don't want to waste the money on seed I don't need, but not every seed's going to do everything it was meant to do. So I'm curious.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say if I was just thinking about like kind of like a high level, like, okay, I know that I want like, 1,000 celosia plants to like fill this area. Like I'm gonna plant at least 25% more, right? Knowing some won't germinate, some might get kind of like, ripped out of their cells, and you don't want to plant them because they're not robust, or, so maybe there's like if I knew I needed an exact number of plants, I'd plant 25% more, maybe 50% more. Like that's just like a kind of top line thing. But the difference between, and then like year over year, I know I want like, like if I plant, let me think of the row feet, it'd be like say like uh 2,000 row feet of sunflowers like every week, then that gives me plenty of sunflowers, right? But the difference between like when something does good and something does bad is like so vast. Like if it's a bad year for something, like it all got eaten by
Right.
rabbits, or like the squash, like there's like a disease on the squash. Like you could plant twice as much as you actually
Right.
wanted to harvest, but only end up with 5% that you harvest. So like I think that so I like that 25% like buffer is just to sort of like account for like small discrepancies, but there's going to be the times where like you lose a whole crop. So for me, even though I know it's less efficient to grow a lot of different things, for me, like the buffer is like having a lot of different crops. There'll always be the year where like all the tomatoes die from disease, and like people are going to be really bummed because everybody likes local tomatoes, or the CSA members are like expecting it, and you just have to apologize and like hope there's like extra potatoes, extra squash, extra lettuce. You know what I mean? You're going to fill in with other things, and like either people are going to be understanding or they're not. But there, you can't really do any more than try your best, and learn to be a better grower. But like those things will always happen. But yeah, I feel like sometimes like the worst case scenario, you can't really plan enough. You can't plant enough to compensate for everything that
A
could go
worst case.
wrong. But like, yeah, so like a little bit extra as a buffer, and then diversity in the number of crops you're growing, because some should do good when some don't. That's like that's the best answer I have for you.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Shanti, thank you so much for being on the Flower Podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.